Right. So I have a few years wool experience, having worked on sheep farms at the age of 16. Have worked again within natural fibers, and a background within traceability and transparency. So really knowing where the origin of whether it is the food or the drink comes from, and actually mapping that route. So what started me with wool, I'm jumping the slides here, with wool was a Belgian farmer told me that he was taking his wool to the container park for recycling at his cost. And during that time of sourcing textiles and also product development with designers, I knew of the problem, but I didn't know the problem here in Belgium. I'm originally English, but speak with an Australian accent because I grew up there. So we need to consider. So I started thinking, okay, what am I going to do? I wanted to set up a mill. I wanted to really roll out and push to support the farmers, but also the good old sheep as well, because their numbers are also diminishing, and not necessarily out of choice. So what I ended up doing was mapping for a whole year the process of production of wool from start to finish, and even giving it a new life with the circular background of mine as well. And then it was also looking at what we have in the wool and the problems and the bottlenecks. And the bottleneck for me that I saw was typically scouring. And then that then led me into looking at what can be done as an alternative. So this slide basically gives an overview of what is in wool. There is other aspects as well that are included, but I will say that I'm also sadly also seeing a lot of plastic being involved. So present day, if we just take a general 1 kilo of wool, it is sadly viewed as a no value product. It goes through 400 liters of water, around ranging varying degrees between 45 to 80 degrees heat. And then by the time you get that 1 kilo of wool, you end up with still, unfortunately, some no value wool at the end, and also your processed wool in the beginning. For small processing here in Belgium at the moment, it is taking up to 2 years. So by the time you take your wool to a mini mill or a spinneret or a spinning mill, you are going to end up waiting 2 years for your wool to come back to you, which if you are a crafter, you want your wool to come back a lot quicker. With large-scale processing, it is much quicker, but then you have your large quantities of anything over 800 to 1,000 kilos. Both of these have had huge price increases in the last 3 to 6 months, and that is also in the last couple of years, and that is also due to the changes in the energy and the water usage. What I have developed is a slightly different method. As the introduction said, I look at wool holistically. So I look at a whole fleece and I actually break it down. In between that, the washing that I use less water. I don't use any chemicals within the processing. I do use some heated water, with the vision when I have a fully functioning plant, it will be all solar and wind generated equipment. But the key focus for me is actually looking at the sorting, because a lot of the wool that does come in tends to not just be, sadly, the shearing of qualities is very variable. It is not, you're generally sometimes getting 2 or 3 cuts of wool. Farmers find that wool is a burden, so therefore they just want to get the wool off their sheep as quickly as possible. So for me, I mapped, as I mentioned, the whole process from the fleece to the clean wool. But I'm also, as other people have mentioned, looking at the lanolin. I'm also looking at the waste that I am collecting from, say, the scouring process, and presently research is undertaken. So I started this process back in 2000 and 2020, and for the last 3 years, I have been gradually working. And this thought keeps on coming back to me, and it will be mentioned slightly further in the presentation. Before we rush to build a new scouring plant or develop further new products, we do need to consider, and that is the challenges that we have with the wool, the high costs for the resources. The legislation is key because farmers here in Belgium are actually being taxed for their sheep. A farmer that I work with, he has 200 in his herd, is now paying 6,000 euros in carbon emission taxes. So it is also looking at the management of the waste and ultimately the cost and the return of wool for farmers versus industry. As the Irish lady, sorry, I've forgotten your name, mentioned, it needs to start at the gate, but it also needs to not just consider the farmer, it also needs to consider the shearer. We also have sheepdogs on the land. They also need to have a good hearty meal. So we often forget that, the sheepdogs also do a lot of work as well. So all these people in the process need to be able to receive a value of the wool. And at the moment, that's not happening. Quality of the fleeces from the shearing and the grading is so important. We've got diverse fleeces here, over 350 different types of sheep Europe-wide. We need to know how we can actually really use these fleeces properly. And it's the right fleece for the right course, as I say. And then it's also looking and working with industry. Everyone says, well, the consumer are the ones that need to be changed. I'm sorry, I think the consumers understand it and see it, but we need to be working with the industries, and the industries need to see and change their mindset for the wool, for the use of wool. And again, the multiple challenges which farmers are having to consider is sustaining their livelihood, future generations, because I know various farmers here in Belgium and also elsewhere in Europe are sort of saying, well, don't go into the future of farming because it's too tough work and you don't get paid anything. And a lot of the farmers, sadly, at the moment see wool is more hassle than it's worth, which I wish to change as well. So with the scouring process, I have started, as I said, in 2020. I explored the R&D. In 2021, I had developed two different types of methods. And in 2022, I developed a further three methods. Over the last 2 years, I have worked with two separate universities here in Belgium, and they have undertaken various research around solvent testing for washing of wool, and the solvents that were used were completely natural solvents. And the results were mixed, but there is possibility of further development and further research. There was a proof of concept that was developed by the other university from the two of the methods, and we have had fairly good success with further research that they have undertaken. I'm also looking at capturing the lanolin in a different process using the methodology that I have created and developed. And over the last year and a half, I've now been able to redefine the process and now scouring 3 to 10 kilos, which was last year, and now I'll be increasing it up to about 100 kilos of wool. I've just recently moved from my house, which we were scouring all the wool, to an actual location and defining the processes even more. We're also looking at the R&D from the washing water and have had very positive results from that, where we could actually take various aspects from that water and use that for other uses. So I feel that we're on the catchment of we still need to do a lot of work with research and development, and I'm always very open to talk to people and share and explore how we could also collaborate. So the journey so far, as I briefly mentioned in the R&D, is the processes of wool. I have not just focused solely on Belgian wool. I have had wool from other countries within Europe because I wanted to sort of see how it would work. The 5 different processing methods the lanolin capture. But the two areas that I have found really quite interesting is that I have seen a reduction in the micron count between 2 to 4. So if you have a typical fleece that is around, say, 30, 32 degree, 30 to 32 microns, it has actually reduced it down to sort of 28, 29 microns, which makes it quite interesting. There is other research that's happening, not by myself, but other people in Europe to actually use enzymes, and enzymes are also helping to reduce the micron count as well. So there is one lady who I'm in touch with in Scotland where they're doing enzyme research, and we're looking at working together in terms of the scouring and the enzyme to see whether we can actually reduce the micron count even more. On top of that, it has made the wool, especially the more pricklier wool. I don't like to say the other word that starts with C, coarse wool, but the pricklier wool has actually also softened the wool as well. So again, this gives positive steps forward for the more typical coarser wool or the pricklier wool that is there with the sheep. And here in Belgium, we have plenty of breeds with prickly wool. And I have, over the last 2 years, saved 3,800 kilos of wool, which would otherwise be burnt, because we do have a lot of farmers that do burn their wool on land, but there is also the collection points when they take them back to the recycling centre for incineration. I do say that for me, it is really, really important to also look at the land soil and the wool quality and how those two work hand in hand. I have, over the years, have now built up good relationships with farmers who are now giving me their wool for the third season. And I have actually been able to map, because all the wool that I do take on, I actually get tested for the micron count, and I build up a database. And with this database, I'm actually seeing that there are peaks and troughs, not just with the typical drops that you see in a micron count on the wool, but actually how the health, the well-being, the food, the soil, the climate, the stress levels, especially with the females, with the cortisol levels, this does impact the wool, and it actually also impacts the micron count as well. For me, with the circular scouring process, I am actually also looking at the usability of all the waste. So when I do say, let's look at a fleece, let's look at it holistically. So instead, the typical, the bum and the head pieces that get thrown away, I want to actually still be able to use them, whether it is for felting or whether it is for other uses as well. And again, I go back to it's using the right wool for the right purpose. So for me, the next steps is to ensure that there is a good, clean, conscious, the wool is clean. And I mentioned Ireland because I know wool is categorized as a category 3 waste, sadly, in Ireland. I'm trying to pinpoint exactly what is the classification of what is clean wool and what can be used, because I am seeing new products that are coming onto the market where some of the wool has not been cleaned, but they're actually going against the skin of people. So we really need to ensure consistency of how wool is graded and accepted across Europe. So to me, lobbying as well as also education is very, very key. Also, I see a key step is to ensure that we do connect. We can't do this on our own, and I've realized that. But we also need to really build those bridges together from farmers, vets, shearers, creators, businesses, industries, right across. Because I see that when people come together, we have a larger ability to make a change, and a positive change as well. And also reshaping the foundation and nurture the collaborations that we have, because we all have the same problem on our doorstep. We all have sheep in our countries. We all have an excess of wool. We need to see how we can work and do it together. I will go back to looking at sort of the well-being of the sheep, because even if we have wool and it goes through the scouring process that I'm scouring and cleaning the wool, we still need to be looking at right at the beginning of the origin, because if you don't have good land, you're not going to have good sheep and you're not going to have good wool. And those three all interlink together. And that is looking at the weather, the climate, the well-being of the sheep, and which I have mentioned already, the stress levels, the land management, and the nutrition and the genetics, and all this all work hand in hand. Because I have, when I was growing up in Australia and working on sheep farms, even back in the 80s, I was seeing the impact of the hotter summers, the longer conditions, and how a lot of the livestock were also suffering from skin cancers and general health. I know Australia and New Zealand have done a lot around management for their sheep, but they're still looking at how these impacts of the weather and the climate are impacting the fleeces. Yes, we can say sheep have evolved over time, and they have naturally, but we've also had a human influence to it. But we do also, our weather and our climate, as you know, has had an increase. So we need to try and look at the aspects that we can help to mitigate future problems. If we have drought conditions, how are the sheep going to survive? If we don't have enough land for grazing and so forth, the maintenance of the land as well, which they do here in Belgium a lot, where farmers subcontract their sheep out to clear the grass that's along the train tracks or near the airports or various other areas as well. So for me, lobbying around the government and not just our own governments, but also European government is very, very key. As I mentioned, the farmer who's now having to pay a €6,000 tax bill, his sheep actually go out, carbon sequester. They actually graze and help to keep government lands clean, yet he is getting a bill for €6,000. And to me, it just does not make any logical sense at all. Then we also have the well-being of the sheep. Happy land, happy sheep equals happy wool. And we also need to have happy farmers and good shearers. And shearers are also part of it. Yes, there is training out there. Yes, though there is a lot of farmers that are also shearing their own sheep, and from farmers that I have seen, not just here in the UK, but also in Ireland, it's as quickly as possible, let's get this fleece off the sheep, because, we have to get through the other 50 or 100 sheep that they have. And when the fleeces are of no value, then there is a problem. Land management, I won't go through these in all detail. I'm happy to share my slides if anyone does want to have a look at them after the presentation, because I'm conscious of time. But land management is key. It means, good soil, good land, good food for the nutrients for the sheep. I see here in Belgium especially, and also across the border with the Netherlands, there's a lot of farmers that co-share information over Facebook groups, which is great. Yet we also need to ensure that, vets are there and present to help ensure that there is healthy land equals the healthy soil, as well as also the healthy sheep. And then nutrients and genetics as well, which I won't go over. So what's next? What would be nice is to sort of partner up and look at what research projects could be done. We are working, I am part of the Fibershed affiliate for Belgium. We are looking at setting up a project to actually take a few countries within Europe who wish to participate on such study and look and seek in how we can run a 3 to 5 year project plan around the health and the well-being and the land management for farmers as well as sheep. So please do get in touch with me if you've got any further questions. And the last thing is let's collaborate. we're guardians of the land and the future and the health, and just as important are the sheep. We need to innovate a little bit more, reconnect with the sheep and the wool and the farmers and the soil, and ultimately let's use the right wool for the right job. Thank you very much for this afternoon, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ngaire, for joining us online. She was supposed to come in person but couldn't make it, unfortunately, but it's great to have you at least online. Could you share us your story, how you challenge designers, giving them all the fleece, not only the part that they want? Or
Oh, yes. To me, when a designer comes and gives me a fleece, they come with one fleece and they walk away with multiple bags full of segregated wool parts of the body, but also the various bits in terms of what they can use the fleece for. And there's one designer who's an interior designer who does carpets and also felting. And she said, I didn't realize that that this fleece could be used, for multiple uses, but also it's given me the vision to look even wider when I actually create items. And to me, she was just really inspired to sort of see that, okay, even the small little scratchings that you get, the small little burrs that you can actually be used, and actually, it's challenging them to not just take, here's a bit of wool, here's a bit of fleece, here's some felted, and let's see what we can do. And this is where we need to sort of innovate and build around education as well, which I think is highly key.
Thank you. Another question is that your process methods, is it available to the public, or when can it be shared? Or
at the moment, it's not available to the public. It can be shared if people are interested. I'm wanting to make it open source, but I want to finalize a few research projects first, just to ensure that the ability for other people to benefit is actually what I'm developing the cleaning process for. In theory, it is basically using a very, very, very old method of scouring the wool, but with a difference. And the 5 different methods are using that same base principle, yet have got different base ingredients that will bring out properties like softening the wool, like also reducing the micron count as well.
And when do you think it will be publicly available? Like 1 or 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Oh, it's not going to be that long. I want it tomorrow, ideally. I'm in the present, as I mentioned briefly in the presentation, that I am moving to a new location. I've not been able to do large scale here at home. The new location will enable me to scale between 50 to 100 kilos per month. Within that, it will really enable me to sort of see how scalable it is. And I know that it is because I have done it, but on a continual scalable process, but also how really well the ingredients that I have been using do make a benefit to the wool. Because ultimately, if we can reduce the micron count, it will then also enable, if the farmers buy back their wool or have their wool brought back to them, then this is also, beneficial for them, where they could then sell at a better price. Ultimately, also, if it is softened, it means that it opens up more options for the use of, say, more pricklier wool. I will add that when I do work with farmers, I do pay them. Sadly, because I'm self-funded and I have not received any funding at all yet from Belgium or government sources, that I pay my farmers in 2 lots. I give them a percentage of when I buy the wool, and then I also give them a second payment when I have actually sold the wool on. And to me, that's important to not just build a relationship, but to see that there is a different method in terms of paying farmers. Because I know with cooperative buying, some places you have to wait, you get a percentage, a very, very small stipend maybe at the beginning, but then you have to wait a whole year before they get their money back. So I try to ensure that, when that wool has been sold to the people, that they're happy to then also know that they're giving something back to the farmer. They have also, one or two designers that I have worked with, interior designers, have said that when they then sold their pieces, they're also happy to give a percentage back to the farmer as well. So there is now 3 steps in terms of the farmers getting a little bit more money than they thought that they would, or none at all.
Thank you. I think a last question is that I know that you created wool pads for homeless people or some vulnerable.
Yes.
Could you tell us about, because our next session is, therapeutic knitting and solidarity projects, so we would love to hear about that.
Thank you for asking. It was a project that I worked with a homeless charity in Brussels just in December, January this year and last year, where I created felted woolen pads, which were then placed into their socks and shoes to give them additional heat and warmth, comfort during the colder climate. But also the wool, especially some of them, some homeless people don't always get the ability to wash, so they find that they do get a lot of blisters on their feet. And the wool pads also is assisted to reduce the amount of blisters that they would suffer to. Many of them said that they didn't suffer any blisters at all after having the woolen pads in them. It was felted wool that was about, so thick, and they just slotted that into their gloves or into their shoes to keep their feet warm.
And were you doing this project alone, or are you going to, make it a European movement?
It would be nice to make a European movement, though I know I can't do everything. It's scouring at the moment, and working with farmers is keeping me busy. It's just I had some excess wool. I didn't want to just have it sat and the moths eat it or so forth, so I turned it into felted wool. It may be another project that I will define or redefine, because I did have some feedback from that the pads were too big, or some were a little thick, or some were a little fine. So I'll be working on that at some point later on in the year. So there will be further developments with them, yes.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope next year you can join us and tell the methods.
Yes, it will be lovely to actually come next year, definitely, in person. And, people feel free to get in touch if you've got any other questions or so forth. So thank you again for having me. I'm very humbled. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.